Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello guys, welcome back with me, Yustika Dian Sari. Here I will explain you about teaching by principle. There are 12 principles and they are divided into 3 types. The first type, cognitive principle, affective principle, and linguistic principle. And I will explain you the first type, cognitive principles. We call the first set of principles cognitive because they relate mainly to mental and intellectual functions. It should be made clear, however, that all 12 of the principles outlined in the chapter spill across somewhat arbitrary cognitive, affective, and linguistic boundaries. Principle 1. Automaticity. Subconscious absorption of language through meaningful use, and then efficient and rapid movement away from a focus on the forms to the focus of meaning, and then efficient and rapid movement away from a capacity. Limited control of a few bits and pieces to a relatively unlimited automatically model of processing language forms, and the less resistance to the temptation on analyzing language forms. And principle 2, meaningful learning. The principle of meaningful learning tells us that some oral training is appropriate selected phonological elements like phonemes, rhythm, stress, and intonation. Avoid the pitfalls of rote learning, too much grammar explanation, and too much abstract principles and theories, and then too much drilling or memorization. Next, activities with unclear purposes. And the last, techniques that are so mechanics that students focus on the mechanics rather than on meaning. And next, principle 3, the anticipation of reward. The anticipation of rewards. Human beings are universally driven to act or behave by the anticipation of some sort of reward, tangible, intangible, short-term, long-term, that will ensue as a result of the behavior. And principle 4, intrinsic motivation. The most powerful rewards are those that are intrinsically motivated within the learners, because behavior stems from needs, wants, desires within oneself. The behavior itself is self-rewarding. Therefore, no externally administered reward is necessary. If all learners were intrinsically motivated to perform classroom tasks, teachers might not be needed anymore. And next, principle 5, strategic investment. Successful mastery of the second language learning will be due to a large extent to a learner's personal investment of time, effort, and attention to the second language in the form of individual batteries of strategies for comprehending and producing language. And next, affective principles. Affective principles are characterized by a large portion of emotional involvement as the feeling about self, feeling about relationship with other learners, and the emotional ties between language and culture. Next, principle 6, language ago. As human beings learn to use a second language, they also develop a new model of thinking, feeling, and acting, a second identity. The new language ago, intertwined with the second language, can easily treat within a learner a sense of fragility, a defensiveness, and a raising of inhibitions. And principle 7, self-confidence. Learners believe that they are fully capable of accomplishing the task is at least partially a factor in their eventual success in attaining the task. Classroom implication. There provide students with ample verbal and non-verbal assurance to the students, sequencing learning and tasks from easier to more difficult. And next, principle 8, risk-taking. Successful language learners must be willing to become gamblers in the game of language to attempt to introduce and to interpret language that is a bit beyond their absolute certainty. And classroom implication, there are create an atmosphere in the classroom which encourages to try out languages, to venture a response, and not to wait someone else to volunteer language. And next, provide reasonable challenges to the learners. Help your student to understand and respond to your students' risky attempt with positive affirmation as praising them for trying. And then principle 9, language culture connection. Whenever you teach a language, you teach a complex system of cultural customs, values, and ways of thinking, feeling, and action. Classroom applications discuss cultural differences, emphasizing that no culture is better than another. Include among your techniques certain activities and materials that show connection between culture and language. Teach your students cultural connotation, especially the socio-linguistic aspect of language. And the last, linguistic principles. The last category of principles of language learning and teaching centers on language itself and on how learners deal with these complex linguistic systems. Principle 10. The native language effect. The native language of learners exerts a strong influence on the acquisition of target language system, either facilitating or interfering. Classroom suggestion. There are regard learners' error as a window to see the underlying system and provide appropriate feedbacks, and then ask learners to think directly in the target language. Principle 11. Interlanguage. Second language learners tend to go through a systematic or quasi-systematic developmental process as they progress to full competence in the target language. And the last, principle 12, communicative competence. Given that communicative competence is the ultimate goal of language learning, instruction needs to point towards its all components: organizational, pragmatic, strategic, and psychomotor. Communicative goals are best achieved by giving due attention to language use, not just language usage, to fluency, not just accuracy, to authentic language and context, and to students' eventual need to apply classroom learning to previously unrehearsed context in the real world. And thank you for watching. This is my explanation about teaching of principle. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.